Dr. Bill Webster is well known to a lot of you viewers. You have seen him here from time to time over the years. He is a focused man ministering to those who have suffered bereavement. He is one of the foremost writers on the topic and very, very highly regarded wherever he is known. And we're really blessed to have him here, especially as Remembrance Day is just around the corner. And he's written a little pamphlet here called Beyond the Call, a book focusing on the bereaved families of those who have lost loved ones, whether it's husbands or wives or children, in the various wars in which Canada is involved in around the world. So Bill, welcome back. Good to have you with us.
Thank you, Jim.
When you focus on the military, I mean, grief is grief, death is death. I'm sure there's a lot of parallels to other things that you've written, but what makes it unique talking to those in the military?
I think there's a couple of things that make it specifically unique, Jim.
Yeah.
First of all, usually when a death occurs in the military, it's sudden, unexpected, and traumatic, which leads to post-traumatic stress in the survivors. So, all of us expect that although even though our loved ones are in the line of duty and in danger, that it won't happen to us. It'll happen to other people. So there's still that sense of shock when the military officer walks up the path and knocks on the door and informs the family. So I think there's the suddenness, the shock, the numbness. There's a reaction that often occurs in anger and guilt. The emotions are no different. They're just at a different quality, and they're often more of. For example, I've experienced and heard from a lot of military families a lot of anger over the fact that maybe military equipment wasn't adequate, or the ammunition was inferior, or they didn't have the right size boots or the right size helmet. And these things aggravate many of the grief issues after a significant loss.
Now, when you talk about post-traumatic stress, is this what used to be referred to, at least in the lives of those who suffer injury, but they still live, but it used to be called shell shock?
That's correct.
Yeah.
My grandfather came back from World War I, and I can still remember some of the stories. He didn't go into details, but he was a soldier in Turkey. And he told us stories of things that I think no human being should ever observe or see. And so every now and then he would go into this shell shock. And of course, at that time, it wasn't talked about because one of two things happened. It was either regarded as a sign of weakness, that he wasn't coping, or even worse, it might be a mental health disorder. He may be actually suffering from a psychiatric point of view. It wasn't until the Vietnam War that psychologists and psychiatrists began to identify the traumatic effect that seeing things, seeing the unspeakable, seeing the horrors and the violence and the mutilation that soldiers often see, that it was identified as a traumatic response to some of the things that they'd seen.
Yeah, and in fact, in your book, you address not only bereavement, but you do address those who return from the line of fire, who are injured, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally. So you got this post-traumatic stress. What else factors into the trauma of the military person?
I think one of the very important factors is that the military is a family within the family, a city within the city. And there is sometimes this attitude within the military families that it's a community of strength. Now, Jim, they need to be, believe me, they really need to be. But sometimes that can be a strength and other times it can be a weakness. Because if the attitude is, no, you got to be strong, you got to tough this out, often people come back suffering from post-traumatic stress and they don't talk about it. They don't mention it because they don't want to be thought of as being weak. Right. Other colleagues perhaps have handled it very well. So what's wrong with me type of thing. So the suck it up attitude is very prevalent in the military. And I think that's one of the weaknesses. Thankfully, I think it's changing because people are starting to realize through the advocacy of people like former General Romeo Dallaire, who's now a Canadian senator. And he witnessed horrific things in Rwanda. And he describes it as the invisible injury. He talks about how a wound, which you can see, someone loses a leg or an arm, or that's an honourable injury. The invisible injuries are often ones that people don't talk about. And in fact, that sometimes the Canadian government doesn't validate and bring to people's attention.
And what about the care that's provided for these men and women with post-traumatic stress? Do they say just get over it, or is there actual specialties that are now focusing in on this issue and helping soldiers who are wounded in this way with this invisible wound?
I think it's changing, Jim. I think that there hasn't been a lot of support. What actually got me interested in this in the first place was that a lady made an appointment to come and see me, and her son had been killed in Afghanistan. What had happened was when he went to Afghanistan, he was asked to name his beneficiaries. So he named his current girlfriend. Within a few months of him being gone, the girlfriend had moved on to another partner and so on. When he died a year later, all the benefits, the insurance money, the help and so on, went to the war widow who had actually moved into another relationship. And mom and dad were left, Now, I understand, this isn't intended to be an indictment, but systems have to be in place. But sometimes people are disenfranchised. And so this mom was left with no help, no benefits, and desperately looking for help in the death of a child.
Now, is suicide a factor?
Suicide is a major factor. And sadly, in Canada, it's only recently been recognized as a war-related thing. There's been almost a conspiracy of silence. And it was a W5 program that actually exposed the fact that people who commit suicide after post-traumatic stress, because suicide is the ultimate expression of post-traumatic stress disorder, people who committed suicide were not recognized. It was put down as a mental health thing. And it was only through the advocacy of W5 that a mother was finally awarded a service medal, or a sacrifice medal, forgive me, in the death of her son. The statistics are frightening. In the UK, in America, and in Canada, generally speaking, for every military death that occurs in conflict, 4 suicides take place afterwards, which is a frightening statistic.
So there's actually more who die from suicide than die in combat.
2 to 4 times. The difficulty has been that until recently, the Canadian government didn't keep these statistics. So we don't really know exactly what it is or how many. But again, suicide is the ultimate expression of post-traumatic stress. So when it's not dealt with, the only way that people can relieve themselves from the pain is through suicide.
Now, Bill, in the book Beyond the Call, and I was fascinated reading it, you have a lot of positive, proactive things that you suggest people put in place when they're dealing with those who have been bereaved or bereaved themselves, or those who have been injured with the invisible wound. We can't go through all of these points because it would take us a good hour. But just in summary, what's the most important few things that people should be aware of in this regard?
Well, I think that there's really one.
Yeah.
And it's this, that we need to talk about it. Yeah. Unfortunately, the Canadian government has kept many of these statistics a secret. And as one eminent hockey player who was abused in his youth said in a recent book, "You're only as sick as your secrets." And I think when we keep these things a secret, the secret becomes more of a problem than the issue. There's a principle that says that which cannot be put into words cannot be put to rest. And so I think we need to encourage people to talk about it, to realize it's not a weakness. They're not mentally ill. They need to talk about it. They need to verbalize what they've seen and the horrors of it. It's a strategy. It's not just a simple matter of going out and talking to everybody. There are specific strategies that are necessary in traumatic counseling. But I think we need a new attitude towards encouraging people to talk about the things that they've seen and so on.
And what about the parents of the young soldier who takes his own life? You mentioned in your book that their big battle often is with guilt.
Yeah.
What if I had just done this or if I had just done that? How do you cope with that?
Well, I think that's exactly, the words that you use there are actually bang on, because every guilt statement contains variations on the verb to do. Right. What could I have done? If only I'd done this, if only we'd done that, if only the government had done this. Because guilt and blame are really both aspects of the same thing. really, I think guilt is rooted in a sense of powerlessness. I could have done something, because people would rather feel guilty than feel powerless. So the key then is to empower people to say, well, we can't change what has happened, and we can't delete from the brain the memories of the horrendous things that you've seen and mates being blown up and all these kinds of things. What we can do is empower people to live the rest of their life. And I think that that really is the key part of traumatic counselling, is in empowering people to know that while this has happened and while that can't be changed, there are things that they can control in their life.
The book is called Beyond the Call. Dr. Bill Webster is the author, Grieving a Loss in the Line of Duty. And it is something that you can access through his website. What is your website?
www.griefjourney.com.
Griefjourney.com.
That's correct.
That will put you in touch with Bill and his excellent work. You've written, what, 10 books, 11 books? You've lost count?
Somewhere around there. All I know is I'm getting too old to carry the box anymore.
Now, there's one of Bill's little books that we are making available to you on our e-store, and it's called Now What? And this is not focusing on the military, but it's focusing on the general issue of bereavement. And again, it's just so well done. And this is for the person who's just experienced bereavement, right?
Someone who's just had a loss or bereavement, who's still feeling numb and so on. This is the idea.
And by the way, what got you into all of this was the loss of your first wife.
That's correct.
From cancer. How many years ago?
30 years ago next year.
30 years ago. Mm-hmm. I know that you're happily and wonderfully married to a wonderful woman, Johanna. But when you look back 30 years ago, do you still remember?
Absolutely.
The feelings are still there. How are you coping 30 years into it?
Well, the feelings are still there, Jim, but the feelings have changed. Because when Carolyn died, the feelings were that I missed her presence. The feelings were, what am I going to do? I figured out what I'm going to do. Right. And I remember her now not as someone who's in the present, but someone who's in the past, who will always be a significant part of my past, but now I have Joanna in my present and many different things in my present. And I think that's really the key to overcoming grief.
Yeah, living in the present. Okay, so here's Now What? And it's available. You can log on to crossroads.ca, or you can call 1-800-265-3100. Very modestly priced, an excellent little booklet for those who have just been bereaved. You're going to want it. Dr. Bill Webster, thanks for coming our way.
My pleasure, Jim. Thank you very much.